I want you to start off today by visualizing a very specific geographical reality. Imagine you're standing on a relatively small volcanic island.
Right in the middle of the Indian Ocean.
Exactly. Hundreds of miles from any major continental landmass. And if you look beneath your feet, expecting an economy built on things you can extract, you are standing in an absolute resource desert.
A total blank slate, geologically speaking.
Yeah. Because if we look at the macroeconomic data profile we've assembled for you today, this island's natural resource rent, which, measures its mineral depletion, its energy depletion, things like oil, gas, coal, precious metals, it sits at a flat, unyielding 0.0%.
Literally zero.
Nothing. There's nothing to mine. There's nothing to drill. Yet despite having zero natural resources to export, this isolated nation, Mauritius, engineered an economic ascent so profound that development economists routinely refer to it as a miracle.
It really is a phenomenal paradox. I mean, when we look at global development, particularly in the post-colonial era, the traditional playbook for rapid wealth generation usually involves extracting and exporting raw materials.
Right, the classic model.
Yeah, we call it the commodity lottery.
Huh.
A nation discovers oil or copper or, rare earth minerals, and they leverage that global demand to build their national treasury.
But Mauritius didn't even get a ticket for that lottery.
No, not at all. So the data we're analyzing in this deep dive forces us to look at an alternative blueprint for national wealth. True, sustainable wealth, in the absence of resources, isn't extracted, it's constructed.
Right.
It requires the meticulous engineering of human capital, highly strategic foreign policy, and a just ruthless commitment to global connectivity.
But an ascent that's steep requires fundamental structural changes to a society.
Absolutely.
And as we'll see, those changes create entirely new vulnerabilities. I mean, the very policies that solved their poverty crisis in the 20th century, they've engineered a really complex set of demographic and environmental traps for the 21st.
Yeah, the growing pains of a high-income nation.
So to understand the traps they are facing tomorrow, we really have to understand the sheer velocity of the wealth they built yesterday. We aren't just talking about a slight improvement in living standards here.
No, it's a complete economic metamorphosis.
Let's look at the baseline metric of gross domestic product per capita. And we're measuring this in constant 2015 US dollars, which strips out the noise of inflation, right? Gives us a clean look at purchasing power.
A true apples-to-apples comparison.
Right. So in 1960, shortly before they gained independence, that figure was sitting around $1,324.
Basically a low-income agrarian society.
Exactly. Fast forward to the precipice of the recent global disruptions around 2019, and that number had surged to roughly $11,990. Yeah, that is nearly a tenfold increase in real wealth per person.
And we also have to look at how that wealth is calculated to truly appreciate the achievement,
Oh, wait, unpack that a bit.
Well, the data stack highlights another metric called adjusted net national income.
Right.
GDP simply measures the total gross output of a country within its borders. But adjusted net national income goes a step further. It subtracts the depreciation of fixed capital, so the wear and tear on machinery, roads, infrastructure.
Oh, interesting.
And it subtracts the depletion of natural resources. It's a much stricter, much more unforgiving measure of sustainable income.
Because it accounts for what you're destroying to make your money.
Exactly. So in current U.S. dollars, Mauritius saw this adjusted income swell from roughly $680 million in its early days to over $13.1 billion.
That's a massive jump.
And here's the kicker. Because their natural resource depletion is zero, almost all of their economic growth translates into actual retained national wealth.
Yeah.
They aren't like hollowing out their physical geography to make a quick profit.
Right, but they were for a long time heavily dependent on the surface of that geography.
Oh, entirely.
When we look at the 1960s data, agriculture, specifically sugarcane, it completely dominated the economy. Agriculture, forestry, and fishing value added accounted for nearly 19.67% of their total GDP.
Almost a fifth of the entire national output.
Right, just tied up in planting, harvesting, and exporting sugar. But today, that number has plummeted to somewhere between 3 and 4%.
A total cliff drop.
Yeah, imagine a chart where you just have this massive green mountain of agriculture in the 60s, and it just rapidly erodes into this tiny sliver. And it's replaced by these invisible, towering skyscrapers of digital and service economies.
That's a great way to visualize it.
But that is a radical restructuring of a workforce. You have generations of families who went from cutting cane in the fields to managing luxury resorts or working in corporate finance. How did a newly independent nation with no capital manage to orchestrate that pivot? I mean, it's not as simple as just deciding to stop farming.
No, it was born out of mathematical necessity. I mean,
Hmm.
Mauritius is an island of roughly 2,000 square kilometers.
Mm.
There is a hard physical limit to arable land.
You literally run out of dirt.
Exactly. You cannot scale a monocrop economy infinitely. Eventually, you hit the ocean. And furthermore, an economy entirely dependent on a single agricultural export is incredibly fragile.
Right. If you export nothing but sugar, your national budget is entirely at the mercy of global commodity traders in London or New York.
Yeah, if global sugar prices crash, your entire economy crashes. If a severe cyclone wipes out the harvest, you face an immediate balance of payments crisis.
Because you still have to import your food, fuel, manufactured goods.
Precisely. So the agricultural model was a ceiling, and a fragile one at that. They recognized that if they stayed in that lane, they'd be trapped in a cycle of subsistence, highly exposed to climate and global markets.
So what if they had stubbornly clung to it? What if they just tried to be the best sugar producers in the world?
They would have faced severe economic stagnation, extreme poverty. They recognized the threat of what economists call the middle income trap before they even reached middle income status.
And the middle income trap, for those who might not know, is when?
It's when a developing nation's wages rise just enough that they lose their competitive edge in cheap, labor-intensive exports like raw agriculture or basic textiles, but they lack the institutional framework and the human capital to compete with advanced economies in high-value, knowledge-based industries.
They get stuck in the middle.
Right. To avoid this, Mauritius deliberately engineered a multi-stage transition. In the 70s and 80s, they utilized export processing zones to attract foreign textile manufacturing.
Which is essentially renting out their cheap labor to build capital, right?
Exactly. But they knew textiles were fleeting. Capital can always move to a cheaper country. So they used the revenue from textiles and sugar to build the foundation for an economy that doesn't rely on physical exports at all.
The high-end service, tourism, and digital hub.
You got it.
So let's break down the mechanics of that service hub, because this is where the geography becomes really interesting to me. If you are landlocked in Europe, or if you share a border with the U.S., exporting services is relatively straightforward.
Sure, you're physically adjacent to your clients.
Right, but Mauritius is isolated. To become a service economy in the middle of the ocean, you have to connect to the global nervous system. You have to be able to move data and money instantaneously.
And the data we have on the wiring of this island is just remarkable.
It really is. We are looking at a population where internet usage grew from basically zero to encompassing nearly 80% of the public.
79.5% to be exact.
Yeah, but the more crucial metric, I think, is their mobile penetration. Mobile cellular subscriptions hit an astonishing 165 per 100 people.
Let that sink in.
I know, right? Think about that. 165 phones for every 100 people. That means you have your personal phone, your work phone, and maybe a tablet just for ordering takeout.
It's a complete shift in the concept of logistics.
Exactly. For an agricultural island, your logistics network is your deepwater port and your cargo ships. But for a digital and financial hub, those 165 cell phones, powered by undersea fiber optic cables, they are the new cargo ships.
They really are. They aren't loading raw sugar onto a freighter anymore. They're extorting consulting services, managing international capital flows.
Coordinating logistics for the entire African continent through data packets.
Yes. And the most immediate consequence of that digital density is financial inclusion. The data shows that account ownership at a financial institution or, with a mobile money service provider for the population aged 15 and older sits at roughly 90%.
Which is a staggering number for a developing nation.
It's basically universal coverage.
Why is that specific 90% threshold so vital to their macroeconomic strategy?
Because you cannot become a credible international offshore financial center if your own domestic economy is entirely cash-based and informal.
Oh, that makes total sense.
Right? When you have a 90% bank population operating on a dense mobile network, you establish the micro-foundations of a frictionless economy. Capital moves efficiently.
The government can collect taxes efficiently.
Exactly. They can distribute social benefits directly, track economic data in real time. This domestic stability and technological maturity serve as a powerful signal to foreign investors.
Like a proof of concept.
Yeah. When multinational corporations look for a jurisdiction to route their investments into Africa or India, they need a location with unshakable financial infrastructure, robust legal frameworks, and zero friction. Mauritius built a domestic environment that perfectly mirrors the speed and reliability of global finance.
Okay, but here is where we hit a fundamental bottleneck. And I want to push back on this a bit.
Sure.
You can lay down thousands of miles of fiber optic cable, right? You can pass legislation to create an offshore banking sector, and you can flood the island with smartphones. But if the population cannot read the legal contracts, if they cannot navigate complex software, the entire system collapses.
The hardware is useless without the software.
Exactly. A service economy is entirely reliant on the cognitive capacity of its workforce. So how did a nation of sugarcane farmers acquire the skills necessary to operate a global financial node?
Well, they executed one of the most aggressive, sustained investments in human capital seen in the developing world. The transition away from agriculture was paired with a massive injection of state capital into the population itself.
Into the people.
Right. Early on, Mauritius committed to universal, free education. The data we're analyzing shows that primary education net enrollment and completion rates hit a remarkably stable ceiling of near 100%.
That's incredible.
And they backed this up with hard capital, routinely spending up to 4.77% of their gross national income on education.
Let's contextualize that figure because GNI is a really broad metric. That means nearly 5% of the total wealth generated by the nation and its citizens anywhere in the world was being deliberately siphoned off and injected directly into classrooms, teachers, and textbooks.
It requires immense political discipline.
Yeah, for a developing nation that was originally quite poor, that requires a massive political consensus. It means sacrificing immediate consumption or flashy physical infrastructure projects to fund something that won't yield economic returns for 15 or 20 years.
But what that investment did was essentially eliminate what economists call learning poverty.
Okay, what is learning poverty?
It's defined as the inability of a 10-year-old to read and understand a simple text. In many developing economies, even if children are physically sitting in a classroom, the quality of instruction is so poor or the resources so scarce that learning poverty remains above 50%.
Wow, over half.
Yeah. And you cannot build an IT sector or a financial services hub with a workforce that struggles with basic literacy and numeracy.
Obviously not.
By ensuring that their completion rate stayed near 100%, Mauritius guaranteed that their entire labor pool was, at the very least, capable of being trained for the modern economy.
But the human capital investment didn't stop at the schoolyard. The data reveals a parallel, and arguably even more impactful, transformation in public health and the domestic environment.
Oh, absolutely. The quality of life metrics are stunning.
Let's look at those. Access to clean fuels and technologies for cooking reached an astounding 99.1% of the population.
Almost universal.
Simultaneously, maternal mortality rates plummeted. We're talking 111 deaths per 100,000 live births in the year 2000, down to roughly 66 in recent years. And access to electricity reached a flawless 100%.
And, those metrics, they are the unsung engines of economic growth.
Right.
We tend to separate, social issues from economic indicators, but they are inextricably linked.
Give me an example of how that linkage works in practice.
Well, take the 99.1% access to clean cooking fuels. In many parts of the developing world, millions of women and girls spend several hours every single day foraging for firewood or biomass.
Just to be able to cook a meal.
Right. Then they spend several more hours cooking over toxic, unventilated open fires, which leads to severe chronic respiratory diseases.
So when a government ensures that almost 100% of households have a clean stove and reliable electricity, they're not just improving health outcomes.
No, they are literally manufacturing time.
Wow, manufacturing time.
They're handing millions of hours back to the female population. Hours that can now be spent participating in the formal labor force, starting small businesses, or pursuing higher education.
The economic multiplier effect of female labor force participation is massive.
It changes everything. And when you combine that with universal electricity, the entire rhythm of society changes. Children can study after sunset. Businesses can operate into the night.
Refrigerate.
Yes. Refrigeration allows for the safe storage of food and medicine, which lowers disease burdens and keeps the workforce healthy. The drop in maternal mortality is a direct reflection of a society that has built functional, accessible healthcare infrastructure.
The state realized that in the absence of gold or oil, The physical health and the intellectual capacity of a Mauritian citizen was their only appreciating asset.
Exactly. We often think of infrastructure as concrete highways or glass skyscrapers. But in Mauritius, the ultimate infrastructure project was the human mind and physical health.
It makes you wonder about the role of geography in all this. I mean, could a massive continental developing nation replicate this exact model? Or did the geographical constraints of a small island actually make it easier to reach 100% saturation?
The geography certainly acted as a containment vessel.
Yeah.
It allowed for high policy penetration.
Right, because everything is so close.
Yeah, when the central government mandated a health or education initiative, it reached the geographic edges of the population relatively quickly. However, the initial capital for those grids and schools still had to be generated and managed without the crutch of natural resources.
Which remains a testament to their institutional governance.
Absolutely.
Okay, so they successfully built the human engine, they educated the youth, they freed up the female labor force, they built the digital highways, they constructed a wealthy, high-income society practically out of thin air.
They did.
But here is where it gets really interesting, and maybe a little scary. Because economic success of that magnitude inherently breeds its own existential crisis.
It does.
When a society becomes highly educated, wealthy, and healthy, it triggers a fundamental shift in human behavior.
You're referring to the demographic transition.
I am.
It's one of those predictable laws of economics, and Mauritius is currently colliding with its consequences.
We are looking at a phenomenon we can visualize as the demographic scissors. Let's look at the historical data. Back in 1960, the crude birth rate was incredibly high, sitting at 39.4 births per 1,000 people. And at that time, the young age dependency ratio, which measures the percentage of the population that's too young to work, generally under 15 compared to the working age adults, it was a massive 86.5%.
Huge number of kids.
Conversely, the old age dependency ratio was a mere 5.7%. So you had this enormous base of children, a tiny sliver of elderly, and a relatively small workforce supporting them all.
But then the public health and education interventions took hold.
Right.
As infant mortality drops, families realize they don't need to have 6 children to ensure 3 survive to adulthood. And as women enter the workforce and gain access to education and contraception, they naturally choose to have fewer children, and they have them later in life.
And the data reflects that shift violently. The crude birth rate plummeted from 39.4 down to roughly 10.2 per
A
thousand.
massive drop.
As a result, the young dependency ratio fell all the way down to around 20.6%. But simultaneously, because of that excellent healthcare and 100% electricity access, life expectancy surged.
So people are living much longer.
Exactly. So that old age dependency ratio, the percentage of retirees relying on the workforce, it tripled from 5.7% to nearly 18.9%, and the trend line is pointing steeply upward.
To understand the economic implications of this, we really have to look at how Mauritius utilized the demographic dividend.
The demographic dividend.
Right. It's this golden temporary window in a nation's economic history. When birth rates first begin to fall sharply, you suddenly have very few new dependent children being added to the system. But the massive generations born in the decades prior to the drop are now grown up and entering the labor market.
So for a period of about 30 or 40 years, your demographic pyramid bulges in the middle. You have an absolute surplus of healthy, educated workers and very few dependents, young or old, draining resources. You have maximum producers and minimum consumers.
Exactly. And Mauritius rode that demographic wave perfectly. That massive bulge of young workers provided the fuel for the textile factories, the tourism boom, and the digital financial sector.
But the demographic dividend is not a permanent state.
No, it is a wave that eventually crashes. And the data clearly shows that Mauritius has reached the crossover point.
Right.
The large working generation that built the economic miracle is now reaching retirement age. And because birth rates fell so drastically decades ago, there's a much smaller cohort of young workers entering the market to replace them.
So visualize a literal pair of scissors closing on a graph. The blade pointing downward represents the shrinking youth population and falling birth rates. The blade pointing upward represents their rapidly expanding elderly population.
I like that visual.
And right where those two blades intersect, that is the exact moment the demographic dividend ends. And when those blades cross, the economic math becomes incredibly punishing.
It creates a multi-front crisis for a service economy. First, you face a shrinking tax base. You have fewer young workers earning incomes and paying the taxes necessary to run the state.
Makes sense.
Second, you face an exploding liability side of the ledger. An aging population requires exponentially more healthcare resources, geriatric care, and pension payouts.
The costs just balloon.
Exactly. And third, and perhaps most critically for a nation that relies entirely on human capital, you face a severe, chronic labor shortage. Businesses cannot expand if they cannot hire.
Wait, let me challenge that premise for a moment.
Go for it.
We established that they have an incredibly robust digital infrastructure. 165 cell phones per 100 people. A highly educated, hyper-connected workforce. If the problem is simply a lack of human hands to process paperwork or manage data, can't they just automate their way out of this aging crisis?
Just use AI for everything.
Yeah. I mean, software doesn't require a pension, and an AI doesn't retire at 65. Can't they use their tech sector to artificially inflate their productivity per worker?
It is a critical piece of the puzzle, and they will absolutely have to lean into automation and artificial intelligence. Routine cognitive tasks in banking, logistics, administration, those will have to be digitized to offset the labor shortage.
Right.
But automation has hard limits, especially given the specific structure of the Mauritian economy. Let's look at another data point from the dossier. International tourism.
Oh, the tourism numbers. The data shows international tourist arrivals grew from around 437,000 in 1995 to over 1.3 million just before the recent global shocks.
That is a massive volume of people traveling to the island.
It is.
And that tourism is overwhelmingly high-end luxury hospitality. You cannot automate a five-star luxury experience.
I guess not.
Right. Tourists paying premium rates to visit an island paradise are paying for human interaction, for chefs, guides, concierges, personalized service. A robotic bartender or an automated hotel check-in kiosk directly undercuts the premium value proposition of their tourism sector.
You don't fly halfway across the world to talk to a tablet.
Exactly. Furthermore, in the realm of international finance and offshore consulting, while AI can process the data, high-level corporate structuring and relationship management still require human trust and negotiation. Automation can mitigate the demographic decline, but it cannot reverse it.
Okay, so if they can't fully automate, the standard macroeconomic solutions for a shrinking workforce are either raising the retirement age, which is universally unpopular and politically explosive,
Very true.
or mass immigration. You just import young, skilled workers from countries still experiencing a population boom.
Which brings us back to the immutable constraint of geography.
Right, the island.
Mass immigration is a viable strategy for Canada or Australia, which have vast expanses of undeveloped land. But Mauritius is a small, densely populated volcanic island. There's a hard limit to the physical infrastructure housing, water resources, road capacity, waste management.
You can't just build infinite suburbs.
No. You cannot simply import 500,000 young workers without triggering an acute housing crisis and severe ecological degradation.
And that ecological degradation leads us to the final and perhaps most concerning layer of data we need to analyze today. Because the pursuit of a high-income, hyper-connected society has generated a quiet, accumulating environmental debt.
It has.
The transition from an agricultural island to a modern service hub was not without physical consequences.
This is the tragic paradox of modern island development. Island nations are historically the least responsible for the historical accumulation of global greenhouse gases, yet they're on the absolute front lines of climate vulnerability.
Rising sea levels, intensifying cyclone patterns.
Exactly. They pose an existential threat to their coastal infrastructure and their tourism industry. Yet, to achieve the wealth necessary to defend themselves against these threats, Mauritius had to adopt the energy-intensive consumption patterns of the developed world.
Let's look at the hard numbers on the environmental toll. The data tracking adjusted savings regarding carbon dioxide damage paints a really stark picture. As a percentage of their GNI, the cost of their CO2 damage surged from roughly 0.53% to 1.36%.
Which sounds small until you look at the raw dollars.
Right. When you translate that percentage into absolute monetary terms, the leap is massive. In the early days of their development, carbon damage represented about $14 million. Recently, that figure has exploded to over $160 million.
Wow.
And if we look at absolute emissions, total CO2 emissions, excluding land use changes, skyrocketed from a mere 0.3 metric megatons to roughly 2.7 metric megatons.
It's the unavoidable carbon cost of modernization.
Yeah.
I mean, you cannot maintain a network of 165 cell phones per 100 people without a massive continuous draw on the power grid.
Server farms use a lot of power.
Huge amounts. And you
Okay.
cannot process 1.43 million international tourists without aviation fuel, fleets of air-conditioned transport, and highly energy-intensive resort infrastructure.
So a service economy might look clean compared to a coal mining economy, but the digital and hospitality sectors are voracious consumers of electricity.
It's absolutely voracious.
And where is that electricity coming from? Because this is the detail that really highlights their external fragility. You have an island bathed in tropical sunlight, surrounded by the kinetic energy of the ocean and consistent trade winds. Yet, the data reveals that historically, their energy grid is dominated by fossil fuels.
That's a huge blind spot.
Oil, gas, and coal have consistently accounted for between 70 and 80% of their total electricity generation, while renewable energy sources have stubbornly lingered in the 20 to 30% range.
And this represents the deepest vulnerability in their current economic model. Every ounce of that coal, every barrel of that oil, and every cubic meter of that gas must be imported across thousands of miles of ocean.
Which means they are essentially renting their economic miracle from global commodity markets. You look at the data, they achieved 100% electricity access, which is an incredible triumph of public policy.
Unprecedented for their region.
But they do not own the source of that power.
Renting your miracle is a highly accurate way to frame the geopolitical risk. By transitioning away from sugarcane, which, they grew domestically, to an economy powered by imported hydrocarbons, they basically traded one form of dependency for another.
From the soil to the cargo ship.
Exactly. They are now entirely exposed to the volatility of global supply chains. Let's explore the mechanics of that vulnerability. Despite their immense success in exporting intangible services like offshore banking, IT consulting, and tourism, their physical survival requires massive imports.
Because you can't eat banking software.
Right. They import the vast majority of their food, they import their manufactured goods, and they import their energy.
So if there's a shock to the global logistics network, the entire Mauritian ecosystem is threatened.
Exactly. Think about it. What happens to the Mauritian economy if a major geopolitical conflict chokes off the Strait of Hormuz, sending global oil prices into the stratosphere?
Their import bill would double overnight.
Yes, leading to massive inflation and a potential balance of payments crisis. Or, what happens if the global community, in an effort to combat climate change, implements a strict universal carbon tax on international shipping and aviation?
Oh man, the cost to import their food and fuel would surge, and the cost for tourists to fly to the island would become totally prohibitive.
The very lifelines that connect their service economy to the world would become financial liabilities.
It's a terrifying scenario for a small island. You have built a fortress of wealth, but you rely entirely on a daily convoy of ships to bring you water and ammunition. If the convoy stops or becomes too expensive, the fortress starves.
This is why their current reliance on 70 to 80% fossil fuels is not just an environmental issue. It is the single greatest macroeconomic threat to their sovereignty. As long as their energy is imported, their wealth is conditional.
Okay, let's zoom out and synthesize the entirety of this deep dive, because we are looking at a nation standing at a profound historical crossroads. The Mauritius miracle is an undeniable reality.
It truly is.
They provided a masterful blueprint for the developing world. They prove that you do not need to pull gold or diamonds or oil out of the earth to become a high-income nation. They took a monocrop, sugarcane island, and engineered immense wealth by meticulously investing in the human mind and physical health.
They did everything right.
They achieved near 100% education, eradicated learning poverty, electrified every home, and wired their society with a digital density that rivals the most advanced economies on Earth.
They absolutely won the 20th century development game.
Yeah.
But the data unequivocally demonstrates that crossing the threshold into high-income status does not mean you have solved economics.
Right. It just unlocks the next level.
Exactly. It simply means you've unlocked a much more complex, unforgiving set of challenges. The demographics that fueled their rise are now in retreat, leaving them with an aging population and a shrinking workforce. The fossil fuels that power their modernization have left them with a surging carbon footprint and a dangerous dependency on global supply chains.
They avoided the traditional middle-income trap, but they are now facing a new kind of trap one, defined by demographic exhaustion and external energy fragility.
A trap of their own success, in a way.
To survive the next century, to prevent their miracle from stalling out, Mauritius has to execute a second, equally radical transformation, We could call it a green evolution.
I like that.
They possess this incredible digital depth, the 90% banked population, the pervasive mobile network. The mandate now is to merge that advanced digital infrastructure with a complete overhaul of their energy grid. They have to stop renting their power from foreign oil markets and secure true energy independence by harnessing the sun, the wind, and the ocean that surrounds them.
They have to transition from an imported carbon economy to a domestically sovereign green economy.
Right.
It is the only mathematical pathway forward that guarantees both their economic stability and their physical survival as a coastal nation.
Yeah. Which brings me to a final thought I want you, the listener, to mull over as we conclude this analysis. Mauritius proved that human capital is the ultimate resource. But here is the lingering question. When a nation's population inevitably ages, when the workforce shrinks, and when artificial intelligence begins to automate the very service and digital jobs that built their wealth, what becomes the next critical resource?
That is the million-dollar question.
In 50 years, could the pressure of this demographic trap actually be the catalyst that forces Mauritius to innovate once again? Just as they reinvented themselves after the era of sugarcane, perhaps the severe lack of young workers and the threat of climate change will force them to engineer the world's first fully automated, completely green, sovereign island economy. The constraints of geography forced their first miracle. It will be fascinating to see if it forces their second.